Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Quinn Wang. I am a San Francisco-based cataract surgeon. I'm also the co-founder and CEO at Quadrant Eye, which is powering remote eye exams. So I have with me today Dr. Paula Muto, who is the founder and CEO of Uberdoc, which is in partnership with Quadrant Eye. Paula is, like myself, a practicing surgeon. She's a vascular surgeon on the East Coast, and she has been a great resource and source of support for me. And I am so happy to have her on today. Welcome, Paula, and thank you for taking the time.
I'm thrilled to be here, especially since I feel like when I met Quinn not too long ago, I really felt we were kindred spirits, and it's always exciting to see other female physician entrepreneurs, and fellow surgeons. So thank you for having me.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you came up with the idea for Uberdoc and how you're able to balance the responsibilities of that with being a practicing surgeon?
So I'm a surgeon, a vascular surgeon. I'm from an entire family of surgeons. My dad was a great surgeon and, as it turned out, an entrepreneur. We called him a crazy inventor. He was a thoracic surgeon with a lot of inventions and patents, and they actually a lot of them were manufactured, but we never really paid attention to Dad. We said he had crazy inventions, but so he was a great inspiration. My brother's a surgeon. I'm married to a surgeon, two uncles surgeons, all in Massachusetts for a collective century. I've been in private practice for over 20 years, and I really just didn't like the system. I was getting extremely frustrated. I felt that my patients weren't getting to me soon enough. I felt there were too many obstacles in the path, and I thought I could continue to write angry letters to the Wall Street Journal, or I could try to change the system. So I came up with an idea after reading an article in the New York Times about a poor woman who twists her ankle in New York City, and she goes dutifully to the emergency room and then to the primary care, who refers her to an orthopedic in Stamford, Connecticut, which she can't get to. It's illogical. So she Googles orthopedic surgeons, and then within a 2-block radius finds 20 of them, goes to one, pays cash, and says, wow, that was easy. Why can't it be this way? It's like, why can't it be this way? Why can't it be easy for everyone to find a local doctor that can take care of them for a transparent price? And Uberdoc was born. And 6 months later, we had a platform launched in a beta test. And then we then launched it to the patients. We started to grow like every startup grows. I went on and suddenly I realized I created something probably a little bit bigger than me. But everything kind of went our way. Doctors loved the concept. Employers loved the concept. We started to grow and grow. We started with 6 core surgical specialists. The internal medicine doctor said, why can't we be on the platform? We're specialists too. And was like, why not? We started to expand. We gave it to the doctors without charge. As healthcare got more and more expensive, deductibles kept getting higher and higher. Suddenly our model seemed to fit very nicely.
So I discovered Uberdoc because being an ophthalmologist, eye exams were deemed not necessary. And so my clinic closed along with a lot of eye clinics around the country. And I was looking for telemedicine solutions for ophthalmology, for eye care in general, and didn't find any, which is what led to Quadrant Eye. I said, okay, so no one has solved this problem. I will solve it myself. But in the course of searching for that solution, I found Uberdoc, and I saw that you were also a practicing female surgeon, and I was like, I have to follow along. And then, as you know, I kind of just like reached out to Brianna because I was getting the emails, and I think I literally just said, hey, I'm a surgeon in San Francisco. I'm an ophthalmologist. I made this thing. Can we partner? And then from there, it just was super natural and easy to work together. And I think that's very rare, whether that be in Silicon Valley or in medicine. So I feel very lucky. And then when you just said you don't feel like you're leading the way, actually you are. And it's just like I tell people, man, if I had someone like Paula as a mentor when I was a med student. Who knows where I would be now? Because I didn't, like, I just didn't think it was possible to be more than just a doctor, as they say. But clearly, there's a lot of ways to modify one's medical career if given the right tools, given the right encouragement, or the right circumstances, like with COVID. So having said all that, you mentioned, you got tired of the startup thing, standing in front of investors, and it's a very difficult position to be in, especially as a woman. And
Yes.
so I kind of wanted to explore that a little more, how your experiences as a woman during training, medical training, and then seeing patients and then pitching to investors has evolved over time and what you've learned from that.
So it's interesting. So I'm 56. So I like to say I was in college at the time of what we call the meritocracy. We weren't the first generation of women to break the mold. We came behind other women who had been in colleges and in high schools that were all male. They became co-ed. So co-education was there about 5 years before every school that I went to. It wasn't there for 20, but it was there. Um, but I was the only girl in my math class in high school. In college, it turned out that my thesis advisor, who's still a wonderful advisor for me, Lisa Raskin, was the first tenured female professor in the sciences. It's hard to think that happened while I was in college. But so there were still very few women that were kind of in that leadership role, and the professors. But you worked hard. You took the same test as your male counterparts. You were graded the same way. We went into medical school. It was about 50-50, men and women. Surgical programs when I started were still about maybe 25%. I mean, I chose a program, obviously, that graduated women. There were still many programs at the time that took women in as interns, but never graduated them as chiefs. And so those programs you simply avoided. But the program, it was hard. So we had 20-40% of our chief residents were women. And so it was beginning to kind of go into that. It was becoming open to everybody. Again, you had to work hard. Maybe you had to work a little harder. You didn't really pay attention much to. You never really felt that you were being denied anything, although you clearly weren't always. You always had to kind of make sure you were in the right place at the right time. When I went into practice, it was kind of like, wow, what a difference the world is. I was the only woman and the youngest by far in a community I went into. I had finished my vascular fellowship. I had already had one child. I had my baby during fellowship. I actually was in labor during the boards. I took my written boards and did pass them while in labor, delivered her the next day, went back 4 weeks later, have my badge of honor. Nobody really thanks you, but I finished my fellowship, and then I entered a practice, had my second child, and took time off for my maternity leave, money that I had put aside, time I had done with call, and I got fired for taking maternity leave. I was fired for being on maternity leave. They hired another woman while I was gone. Very interesting. But I landed on my feet in my dad's office in outside Boston. I did not want to join him at first, and I had already been in practice a couple of years. And yes, I had an attorney that extracted me with my pension and so forth. But it was the best and worst experience of my life. To have a child and find that someone fires you for maternity leave, and I said I'd never go back. At that point, I was going to work for myself, and I never went back. So that was my first real introduction to this world. Is an unusual place, shall we say. But I fought back, and it was funny because they handed me my practice on a platter at that point, because then I was working for myself, working for my patients, doing general vascular call. I look back and I think, how did I do it? But, you get very good when you have to be on all the time for yourself. And so I think that I like to think I'm a tough person, and I got through that. But I look at all of my experience and I thought, that's crazy. I had to be at 150% the whole time, right? The whole time. And I think that that's really, really hard to do. And I began to appreciate this when I entered into the business world. I thought, okay, I'm going to use the same set of rules I've always used. Get to know the lay of the land, know where the doors are closed, and don't go knock on those. Find the open doors, find the paths. Don't go to the residency that didn't graduate women. Choose the one. Be smart. Choose the one that's going to get you where you need to go. So when I entered the business world, I thought it was going to be that easy. I just had to work hard, hit milestones, prove myself, play by the rules, find the doors. I did not find that in the business world, in the world of startup. I was astounded to find out the statistic that came out about 2 years into my journey, the data that 2% of women founded companies are funded. 2%, not 40%, not 10%, not 15%, 2%. And if you take Theranos out of the mix, it's a statistical zero. So that was such an absolutely overwhelming moment in my journey, because no one of my advisors, and I had a great lawyer in Boston that did startups. I had a bunch of people advising me, all really well-intentioned people who had advised a bunch of startups and had told me what to do. And I had a very feminist PR person at the time. And I asked every single one of them, why didn't you know this? Oh, that can't be true. I said, how could it not be true? He said, well, I wasn't aware of that. I said, if a patient of mine asked me, Dr. Muto, you performed an operation that fails 98% of the time, and I said to them, I wasn't aware, then that's really not a very good answer. And I felt that they kind of, the entire industry wasn't paying attention. Right? They didn't pay attention. They didn't know it existed. And that really was, when I held them all up to that standard, and I realized they kind of not just let me down, but let the whole, the system. So at that point, I said, that's when a part of me pulled back and said, I'm going to bootstrap this company until I can find a way and to find the right investor that would understand. And I found an investor in California, and obviously we're always still looking, but it is a challenge. It is an absolute challenge. I think it's why women-owned companies tend to be a little more successful, because they're finding us much later in the process. We've already kind of suffered through a lot of growing pains that other companies might have not survived. But it is a tremendous problem. And it's one of the things that I'd like to shine a light on once we kind of get through to the other side of this, because young people like yourself should not be faced with this. This is just, it's absurd. And at least there should be a playbook for people. So that's my challenge.
A lot to unpack there. And I have to say, I didn't know about the fact that you got fired for
having a baby.
That's ridiculous.
It was very common.
I would like to think that it's better now. So when I was a med student, a really good friend of mine, neurosurgery resident, she was rotating through neurology, and that's where I met her on my neurology rotation. She had recently given birth, and at my medical school and at that neurosurgery program, every year there are, at that time, there were 2 new residents, and she was the only female. When she got pregnant, she was forced to use her 3 weeks of vacation as her maternity leave, and they made her life very difficult for even taking those weeks, even though there were a whole ton of men who could have picked up the slack, especially since there were research years built into this residency. And that to me was such a shock. And I think about that even today. And knowing the background of it, knowing personally someone who suffered extreme consequences just for taking maternity leave, it seems that things have gotten better, but only marginally so, right?
Right.
For female trainees at my med school, in my med school class, it was pretty much 50-50, men and women. In my residency, each year there are 5 ophthalmology residents at UCSF, and in my class there were 3 women and 2 men. So like the percentages look pretty good, but it still is a problem that female trainees and early attendings have to think about when it comes to having a family. Like, how is that going to impact the trajectory of your residency? You have to like jump through hoops to plan, and sometimes your co-residents aren't going to really understand. So there's like still a lot of subtlety with this.
It's interesting. So here I am on the soapbox complaining about the business world. I'm thinking in some way, surgical training was somehow more fair, or at least more transparent. But in my journey, I suddenly started to pay attention to parity amongst women surgeons. And this came about because of, part of Uberdoc. I'm in chat rooms talking to people, especially in the American College of Surgeons, telling them about Uberdoc, please join Uberdoc. And so I started a conversation with a surgeon in Chicago, Pringle Miller, who was doing a narrative on women's, on microaggressions, on sexual harassment, on the whole Me Too and parity. So we started talking. She heard about the story about me being fired from having a baby. And the next thing we started a hashtag Women's Surgery Me Too / Time's Up movement. We started more and more women that were coming to a group me, and then it moved to a Slack. And then it was trying to get onto the American College of Surgeons chat rooms, but they didn't really like us in the chat rooms over there. They're like, ladies, let's not make it political. It's like, really? We're talking about microaggressions. We're talking about, going into, getting a nurse that was kind of rude to them and was nice to the male counterpart. I mean, it's the stuff that we like deal with almost every day. There were things of sexual harassment, but most of it was bullying from co-workers, bullying, and people were asking each other for help and hearing stories. So we ended up with 2 sessions at the American College of Surgeons. We sponsored 2 sessions. Uberdoc actually sponsored them, where women came and shared their stories, and it was compelling. I mean, women from all around the country in all different specialties, G1 oncology, general surgery, bariatric surgery, vascular surgery, just sharing all these stories about, how they have been, and in situations where they didn't know what to do, and they were reaching out to older surgeons, women around the country, to kind of get a piece of advice about, I feel bullied, I'm going to be let out of this practice, and so forth. And it was really interesting because during this time period, the American Association of Women Surgeons, Sarah Parangi, did a whole study on parity. And it turns out that we're 80% across the board in every specialty. Women make 80% of men in surgery, in medicine. And you're like, I never thought that. But then I'm like, wow, I probably had to work harder than my husband to get a referral. And women, it was unbelievable when they looked. The only specialty that had parity was radiology, because radiology is gender neutral. You don't really know who's reading the x-ray, right? Every single specialty, even OBGYN, pediatrics, specialties with a lot of women, all of them were 80%. And they traced it back, and they realized your first job interview, when you got hired for your job, they're going to offer you less than the man that walks in the room. So at the Mass General, they're trying to work with the women residents to kind of train them to think, to ask the questions. But this is because it's a law right now in Massachusetts. You have to pay equal pay for equal work. But I was astounded to see that statistic. So here I am criticizing the business world for investing in only 2% of women-founded companies, and then my own profession, it's 80%. So I always say that the most important thing we can do for women is not to lean in, but to say we give up and we need to start again. We have to be strong and say, yeah, you think I'm superwoman, but that's wrong. I don't fight for the superwoman. I fight for the mediocre. I think the parity is when the mediocre woman can achieve the same as a mediocre man. We should not have to be superwomen to just make parity, right? We should not have to be at that 150% all the time. It's exhausting, it's draining, and it might be the reason why women do drop out from medicine, right? The statistics are pretty high, faster than their male counterparts. But I think that's truly victory is when we just are true, when we can support the good woman, the average person, not just the superwoman, because we're not all superheroes. Far from it.
So much of what you said was compelling to me and surprising to me. The 80% is just ridiculous. And, at least in the programs I've come through, that is not a subject they even touch. They do not tell us how to negotiate contracts when it comes to issues of maybe men of a certain ranking or of the same ranking bullying you, ranking like colleagues. Oh, how far along are you in your career bullying you? I've often had mentors, older women, surgeons tell me to just kind of suck it up.
Lean in. Again, that's what they told me too, because they just be quiet, keep your head down. It's like, but you have to have nothing to lose, right? You have to be in a position to have the authority and the voice. The voice.
The voice is a lot. Sometimes it seems like shouting into the void, but like even that first step of being willing to shout is very scary for a lot of women. And it took me a while to get to the point where I'm like, okay, I'm shouting. It doesn't matter if it's into the void, but at least I'm shouting. I'm not being quiet. I'm
angry. Now you're disruptive. Now you're disruptive. Someone's going to be offended.
Yes.
I mean,
I've offended many people just because of the fact that I am not afraid to shout, not even by my shouting, right? So that's just crazy. So it sounds like, the challenges that we face in a field that is very, let's say, malignant in micro and macro ways do kind of give us the tools to now navigate the business Silicon Valley world where the lack of parity is very dramatic. Like that 2% number, yeah, I've seen that floating around a lot, and there are a lot of women in Silicon Valley that are agitating for change. There have been really great movements like All Raise to help empower female founders. At the end of the day, though, it's still not enough.
Statistics don't change. Right. This is the thing. So I think that there's a lot of movement underfoot, and that's important. And just like in our own profession, the change has to start at the top, right? You have to start allowing women into positions of leadership, into those academic positions and the residency programs, for example, the training. It's not always easy for women to remain in those tracks for a variety of reasons. And I think that if you don't have the change ahead of you, it's really hard. But I will say that that in my experience with talking to investors, one of the most, I was at a meeting, I was actually a Society of Physician Entrepreneurs in Boston, and they had a representative from one of these venture capital firms there, and they had a lot of physician entrepreneurs hanging on his every word. Well, this is what we want in a founder. We want them passionate. We want them this, the usual list of what they're looking for, right? So I turned to him because I was a panelist with him, and I said, just out of curiosity, the statistic of only 2% of women get funded. Yes. I said, why do you think that is? So Mr. Chatty Cathy, who had everybody spellbound, and he, with all the reasons for this, he went speechless. Like literally, you could see his mind trying to say, I got to come up with an answer, right? So he started to get a little nervous. And I said to him in a very maternal tone, that's okay. If you don't have an answer, that's okay. Very patronizing. And then he looked at me like, I'm not going to let this old lady tell me that. So he spits out of the mouth of babes, because it's easier when you know the person. It's easier when you know the person. So now what he has said was that, of course, it's familiarity. It's much easier if you're going to write a giant check, right? You're writing a giant check and you have investors behind you that you're responsible for, right? There's a lot of responsibility there. You have to make sure that you're feeling comfortable with where that goes. And the safe bet is always going to be the familiar. There's no familiar with women. There's just not enough of us who make it through to that level and get in front of those eyes to create those relationships to be the familiar. Because the purse strings are if 98% of the money is going to men, 98% of the money goes to men, and then that is where it is. And I think that was a really important piece of information. And of course, all the entrepreneurs in the room were like, okay, well, forget that venture firm. We don't know. At least they saved us time. But honestly, I think that's fundamentally it. The relationship has to be there. So, if I know you, Quinn, and you come to me with another project and we had a success with what we did, we're more likely, right, to work together again. It's just as simple as that. And I think that is one of the challenges when you have funds that are like women founder funds. They have the same problem, right? There's still that unfamiliarity there. There's still that like lack of knowing. So it's just going to take time.
And I would say actually that a big problem that people don't recognize is that female founded and female led funds often have less money to work with. And so they are hamstrung that way as well. And that creates a vicious kind of a cycle where female founders feel that they don't have that access to these funds that say they're specifically targeting female founders. But it's because we all don't have as many resources as these larger traditional Silicon Valley big funds. And it's familiarity. It's just blatant sexism, I think.
You think? So one of the funds that I remember, one of the funds actually had a female, like it's this particular venture fund had an arm just for women companies. Like, fantastic. So I'm like, okay, I spoke with the head of that subsidiary, the sub fund, and they're like, oh, we're very proud here that we're not 2%, we're 17%. I'm like, wait, 17%? Where's the other 83%? Am I missing my math? And it's like, well, it turns out that the language is the money could go to a female founder and or something that would benefit women. So I suppose if you were doing some type of, making, this fashion thing or some, saving, like doing some kind of women's health agenda issue, or that you would be funded. And I was like astounded. And she was so proud that they had 17%. So, it's crazy.
See me rubbing my temples here. That's ridiculous. That's just so representative, though. Okay, the idea that, hey, this money is allotted to companies that could benefit women, but don't necessarily have to be led by women, which implies that men know best sometimes how to create products that would advance the position of women in society or make female lives easier. Is just it's all a whole load of That,
Right. When you're used to living in the gender neutral world of what we do, right? I mean, I mean, outside, of course, of doing like a breast cancer case, most patients appendicitis, you're dealing with, your eyes are your eyes, your legs are your legs, the gender comes into play occasionally, but honestly, it's not, we don't judge our patients by that. And so it's hard as a science person to kind of see those changes. But, I mean, again, I laugh, but I also don't laugh because sometimes not that I want to cry sometimes, but it is hard and challenging when you have a product and you have users and you have trajectory and you have momentum and every time they move the goalpost, every time the goalpost keeps moving back a little further. And then you stand next to a 27-year-old kid in a hoodie with some really like silly thing. And you realize that they're investing in him. They're not investing in his idea. They're investing in him. And that's another little frustration to me because you talk about sexism, there could be some ageism here too. They don't really know what to do with me. I'm a 56-year-old surgeon, right? I have a great day job. Am I committed? And that's what I love. They ask me this all the time. Well, are you, how could you be CEO and do all this? I'm like, seriously, you're going to ask a woman that? Like, honestly, I mean, we are so used to multitasking. I mean, I get like all my surgery done. I'm very quick and I get my surgery done before anyone's even awake, because of course they introduce themselves as I'm a venture, I'm head of this company, that company, I do this, I do that. They always have like 5 things going on. But God forbid you have something. So I put those things to rest pretty quickly because, I always laugh at that. It's like that joke in Legally Blonde when she's like, what? Like it was hard. You're like, how did you get into Harvard Law? She's like, what? Like it was hard. It's like, honestly, I sometimes feel like, that we are just maximally efficient often, but no, it is a frustration though. And it is a game we have to play. Uberdoc cannot get to where it needs to go without a strategic partner, without a major investor, because it is way too big for us now. We're a government vendor. That was good. See, as a woman-owned company, Uberdoc can be a government vendor, which is really exciting because they are looking for companies owned by women, which makes us the only company right now that's a government federal vendor for telemedicine and a state vendor, which is pretty exciting, right? So some things kind of come to our advantage, but to bring all this to fruition requires, a team and requires that level. And so you really want to make sure that you don't turn away a good investor because they're going to help you, right? You don't want to be so pig-headed that I'm going to do this alone, because we don't go to the operating room alone, do we, Quinn? They say that to you all the time, right? So me as a surgeon, you must be so egotistical. It's like, I can intubate a patient, put their IV in, open the kit and do the operation, but why would I? Everyone else does their job better than I do. And let me do what I do best, which is the surgery, because then we're all going to get out a lot faster. And the patient's going to have a better outcome. I mean, surgeons are the ultimate team players, right? We're pilots. We need the whole team to fly the plane. And yet they make assumptions all the time. So I'm very much feel like you have to be collaborative. You have to have a team approach. And having an investor that understands is important because they have all the connections. It's not the money. Money is meaningless. It's the connection that comes with the money that can bring you to that next level, because they're introducing you to people now who have had a lot of track record and experience with what you're trying to do. And that's just like when you're in training, to be able to go in with the specialist who's like really good at cataracts, right? That attending surgeon that like does some technique that you must, that's specialty, because you need to scrub with that person to understand, right? Because you're not going to just learn that on your own. So I appreciate that. So as much as we get frustrated, it is in fact the best path forward is that.
Okay, so number 1, congratulations on being a government vendor. I don't think I knew that.
I think I told you that was we're in the process. It's very exciting. We got approved for our first round, and we can look. I don't really understand all of it, but suddenly my inbox is filled with, we're looking for something in the Navy. We're looking for something in this. I'm like, what? So, but it is pretty exciting. Yeah, it's exciting.
So huge kudos. Really, no one can look at that and be like, did she deserve it? Actually, it's like objectively.
I'm a girl. That's what. Okay.
Number two, in regards to teamwork, yeah, I totally agree. Being a surgeon is like, there are some pretty egotistical surgeons out there. I encountered one today, and the scrub techs, none of them like him. Yes, it's a man, an older man. I go out of my way to learn everybody's name and to ask how they're doing and give feedback on how we can all improve together. And just like walking into a room of people who are on the same page as me, who respect me because I respect them, is a completely different experience than walking into an OR room where everyone hates you and like is trying to read your mind, and you get mad at them for not being able to read your mind. But anyway, yeah, I was telling you earlier today, I did my first bilateral same day cataract surgery case, the first private practice ophthalmologist in San Francisco to do that. It was really scary. It took a lot of planning, and I was in touch with all of the team members multiple times throughout the week, this week and last week, to make sure that, every piece of the puzzle, every step, we knew what to do. Like the timing of equipment, the timing of turnover. This is actually only my second time operating at this ASC, and they have only been doing eye cases for a year, but it was so smooth and I was really happy. And that was only because I went out of my way to teach them, and they asked me questions and that made me think, and it was just great. I feel like I trust them and they trust me, and I wouldn't have it any other way. So like the skills I develop in those sort of situations translate so well to all of the things you describe as, the problems that we face, especially when running a company. You also mentioned that investors ask you, are you committed to this? Seems like it's not like, you seem like you've got your hands in everything here. Like, how dare you also be a doctor while running your company? That just seems fishy to me. And I think, well, okay, you expect me to run a digital health company that is responsible for physicians and patients interacting with each other, for providing care to patients without having a working knowledge and working experience of what it's like to be on either side. That just doesn't make sense to me. And so like when you tell me that story about the venture person going up and like lecturing all these physician entrepreneurs about the qualities that a founder must have, there's already a discord there, because physician entrepreneurs are a different class of founders that I think a lot of venture capitalists don't understand, because they're like, yes, the prevailing notion is that you have to be that 27-year-old in a hoodie who can code for like 24/7 and slurp, I don't know, Red Bull and eat ramen and just like work, 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 work. That's the picture of a founder. But actually, no, like having the skills we have, being able to talk to patients and adjust the product with each patient you see is something that other founders have to pay big money for and spend a lot of time doing. We don't have to do that because we have this other thing going on, which is a part-time job or not a part-time job. I think it just goes into the whole package, right? I would say that we're full-time founders in that our companies operate in a space that has broad overlap with our day jobs, like vascular surgeon, cataract surgeon. Like we come into contact with all sorts of patients and providers who are having the problems we're trying to solve.
No,
so
absolutely.
I just it rankles me when I hear that, right? And my co-founder is more of a traditional Silicon Valley person, and he tells me, "Yeah, I don't know. Like it's kind of, I don't understand. Like what I understand is that full-time CEOs, full-time founders get the funding." And I said, "I consider myself full-time. Like I'm not. It's not like when I'm not strictly working on Quadrant I, when I'm operating, I'm thinking about the ways we could become more efficient and how
Right.
Quadrant I can help with that. When I'm seeing patients, I'm thinking, how can I make this patient's life easier? And how can I prevent this person from getting COVID?" And then, like,
Right.
okay, well, how can Quadrant solve this? So I'm always thinking about it, and I'm sure you are too. So it
Right.
just,
It's problem solving. It's always, I mean, we become doctors and especially surgeons to solve problems. That's what we really like to do, right? We see a problem, we want to go in and fix it. We're fixers. So it was always frustrating to me, throughout my career, whenever there was a problem, whether it was a workflow problem, whether it was a hospital problem, whether it was the way a specimen was handled, or whether it was the way something, some kind of, even in like residency, the way the call schedule was structured. If it seemed like it didn't make sense to me, like why is it there? Well, because it's the way it is. Well, but that way it is isn't really good anymore. Can we think about a way of changing it? I don't think I'd ever survive in the military because I'm always looking for a way to it's like, why can't we? Why can't we change the way we do something? And sometimes the answer was just because that's the way it is. And it's like, well, I never really accepted that. And that used to make me very frustrated. When we started, when you think about electronic records, when electronic records kind of came into our lives as physicians and became the intrusive, the product they became, it's because we were never part of the equation. They came through the billing side, they came through the insurance side. Physician administrator types became allied with the hospitals, and they brought in this technology, and no one really asked the end user, right? They never asked us, how is it going to help us in what we do? In fact, it did not help us with what we do. It slowed us down. It created workflows that were not consistent with the way we care for patients. And even the narrative, it's a structured data point where we're shoehorning a patient's individual response to treatment into a choose from above. You can't always choose from above. Sometimes the story is the story on the patient. And for so many reasons, that's what medicine is, right? It's the art, not the science. We always look for the exception. That's why we train. We don't train for the easy stuff. We train for when you have to change for that patient. And so I think that when I think of where we are with our Uberdoc platform, and a lot of the reasons why I wanted, obviously I was passionate about changing and disrupting healthcare and making it simpler. But then as we started to embrace telemedicine, the technology, I said, this is good for doctors. I'm a brick and mortar doctor. Give me another tool to connect with my patient. I don't just have to see you in the office. Now I can do potentially a follow-up visit with you. Maybe I can save you the trip because you're afraid. You need to connect with me. I need to see your leg. I need to see your mother's wound, and your mother's 80 years old and we don't want her to come into the wound center. Can I keep her out of the wound center? Now we're connecting with our patients. We're doing what we do best, but we're just utilizing a different technology. So we don't really change anything. We're just enhancing the doctor-patient relationship, and Uberdoc goes one step further in the sense that we remove the obstacles on the insurance side for those first visits to try to get patients in need of in connecting to a new physician the ability to get there quickly, and trust that once they're on the boat, the doctor's got them safe and they will navigate them from there. Because I do believe doctors know what they're, especially specialists. So I think that we want to be at the head of this digital healthcare revolution. We don't want to be following like we did with electronic records. And I think when you talk about physician entrepreneurs, they all share that exact same dream, right? They do what they do because they have a passion to make it better for their patient, to make it better for their fellow physicians. It's not necessarily to make trillions of dollars. It's just to make a difference. And that's maybe why ventures don't like us because doctors are empathetic, right? And a good business person is never empathetic, right? And to do good, to be a good business mind, you just have to, always think of the profit, not what's going to necessarily be best for the patient. So maybe that's why that they don't like doctor entrepreneurs. But
I don't know. Maybe some of them do. It's so hard to say. There's so many factors, but what I know and what I care about is that the two of us and physicians like us who have the medical knowledge, who have the firsthand experiences with what it's like to practice and the difficulties that our colleagues and our patients face, like when we're determined to make a change can happen. And there's like so many resources, like internal resources, like you were saying, that we can draw upon to kind of fight the good fight, I guess we can say. But
right.
I agree with what you said earlier. Going 150% all the time is incredibly exhausting. It's not hard exactly, because we're used, like as female surgeons, we're used to multitasking, and there is a generational difference. Clearly it extends throughout the career. So it's an asset, but yes, it's tiring. And I agree that true parity will be when we don't have to go
We don't have
100.
to. We don't have to fight them. We should be able to. 80 to 90% should be a good enough, right? Maybe 50%, but no. But honestly, we shouldn't have to. We will never sustain that.
Yeah, no,
It's not sustainable.
I totally
No.
agree. Okay, so we're about up on time. I kind of wanted to end on asking you if you had one practical tip for a female physician who is thinking about getting her toes wet with startup world, but is kind of afraid. What's your one practical tip for this person?
Never let fear stop you. It's really about the idea and the passion. There are some people who want to be an entrepreneur, but they don't have an idea. I love that. I hear that all the time. I really want to do this, but I don't have an idea. Say, what is that? I think you have to be driven by something that irritates you, that's like a pebble in your shoe, that you cannot continue, that bothers you every time you see that patient, or every time you use that medication, every time you use that instrument, whatever that is that you want to fix and solve. It should make you crazy to solve it. And if that's the case, then you just follow your passion. You follow your passion and see. You never be afraid, because you'll never. And also the other thing is, always keep an open mind. Many people around you have tremendous ideas, and they come in the most amazing ways. Your patients will tell you a story and it'll resonate. A nurse will will mention something in passing, and you'll say, I didn't think of that. So you've got to always keep your ears open to everyone around you, because the ideas can come from the smallest areas. But you really have to don't be afraid. If you see something that bothers you, do not be afraid to try to fix it. Because it's complacency. It's complacency that breeds discontent.
I totally agree. And thank you for that. Thank you for your time. I honestly am really looking forward to seeing where this partnership goes. And I am very inspired by you. And I feel that there is a mutual respect that is difficult to find. And this is something that's incredibly important to me. So again, thank you.
Thank you.